Okay, hopefully you can see it now.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So first I wanted to start by talking about what kinds of degrees you can pursue here in the US. There in a US law school. So there are essentially three different kinds of degrees that American law schools confer. The first one is a JD degree, which is the standard American 3-year law degree. That's what most Americans have. Then there is a PhD degree, an academic degree called SJD or sometimes JSD. And then, of course, there's a 1-year LLM degree. And that is what we're going to talk about today. And that is a degree that's most appropriate for folks who have law degrees from other countries and are looking to supplement their legal training in their home country with a deep dive into a US legal system. And so that's the degree we're going to talk about today, but I'm happy to talk about other degrees if you have questions about them. Just very briefly for the JD, keep in mind that unless you plan to transfer from an LLM to a JD program, you need to take something called the LSAT, which is a standardized test. And for the SJD or the JSD program, generally you need to have an LLM. It's a prerequisite to the degree. So you typically can't go from sort of a law degree outside the United States to a PhD program without having done at least an LLM. Okay, so if you decide to apply to an American law school seeking an LLM degree, what do you do? Where do you start? Well, I would recommend that you start with the Law School Admissions Council, or LSAC, which you see on your screen. It's an electronic clearinghouse that essentially allows you to apply to multiple law schools at the same time using more or less the same set of primary documents. And what I mean by primary documents are things like your university diploma, your letters of recommendation, things that won't change from one application to another. It has multiple advantages beyond giving you the ability to apply to multiple schools. Perhaps the primary one being the fact that many law schools only accept applications through the LSAC or the LCAC. In other words, there is no other way for you to apply. There are a handful of law schools, Duke is one, Georgetown is another, that accept direct applications. What a direct application is basically you put in your very old-fashioned process where you put everything in a big, thick envelope and mail it directly to the university. I don't believe there's any law school that just accepts emailed applications. I might be wrong about it. Certainly top law schools don't, and for obvious reasons, because it would just be very difficult to manage and it's very unwieldy. So basically, if you want to do it electronically, and if you want to apply to more than 1 or 2 schools, I think you should go through LSAC. And the biggest disadvantage of LSAC tends to be the cost. You have to pay to register. You have to pay to have your documents evaluated by LSAC, and then of course you have to pay each individual application fee, which run between $70 and $90. So pretty quickly you can run up quite a tab. I will say that there are some schools that provide application fee waivers, and that depends on the program, depends on the year, but it doesn't hurt to ask if a school allows you to apply by waiving its own application fee. You would still have to pay the LSAC fees, but at least you would save money on the school fee. And you would want to check with the admissions office of a particular school. I can tell you that in Duke's case, we generally do not charge an application fee if you apply directly. In other words, if you just send your documents and materials in an envelope through regular mail. But we typically do not offer fee waivers except in very narrow set of circumstances. Okay, another important thing about the LSAC that you have to understand is that each law school has its own requirements in terms of the types of documents and the types of things you need to put together for admission to that program. So you should not assume that just because one law school requires, 2 letters of application, one-page personal statement, then every other school does the same thing. You really need to carefully read the instructions and complete all parts of the application for each school in order to be considered. If your application is incomplete, at best, it will delay your consideration for admission. And at worst, you just will languish in the system and just won't have a really a chance of being looked at by the school. So please make sure that you carefully read each school's instructions, not just the LSAC instructions, before you press that finish button and upload everything to that particular school. All right, so I want to now talk a little bit about the component parts of each of your application. And roughly speaking, each school will require you to submit certain things. They're going to require you to submit a personal statement, a CV, or what we call a resume here in the United States, 2 or more letters of recommendation, a transcript or transcripts from your home country institutions that you've attended. Some schools, Duke included, will ask you to submit a scholarship request if you're seeking scholarships. And then others, there might be some additional pieces of information. So I'm going to talk about each component separately. So the first one is personal statement. And I have to tell you, I've read thousands of those over the years. And just this year, I've read many hundreds. And so I kind of have some strong feelings about those personal statements. And I think the biggest mistake that I see applicants make is they basically just take their CV and just transpose it as into a personal statement. So, essentially tell their life story. I was born in this year in this town, and then I went to this school, and then I went to that school, and then I volunteered here, and then I volunteered there, and I received some award, and then I received another award. And maybe now I'm working and I'm doing this and that. This is a very boring personal statement generally, and also is not going to make any impression on the admission officer. Most people who look at applications will actually read the personal statement last. So you should assume that they've already looked at your letters of recommendation, they've already looked at your CV. So if you're basically just repeating what you said, but with just more words, it's basically going to be a useless document. So what I recommend is instead to really think about what you're trying to say about the reasons why you're interested in a particular program and in the LLM more generally. And ideally tie it to a personal story, whether it's because of your upbringing or background or something that felt true to you when you went to the university in your home country, or maybe it's something about the LLM specifically. You can talk about why you wanted to be a lawyer in the first place. Whatever it is, try to make it personal, try to make it authentic, and try to make it a story, because stories are memorable. One of my favorite personal essays this year started this way: I never wanted to be a lawyer. That was the first sentence, right? That's catchy, right? I was like, okay, now I want to know what is happening. Like, why is this person applying to the LLM program? And then they had a great explanation of what changed, right? The point being, really think of it as a story that you're trying to say. The other kind of tip I have is to make sure that you spend at least 15 to 30% of your personal statement talking about the specific school that you're applying to. Is what I call tailoring or adjusting your personal statement. I understand that if you're applying to multiple schools, you're not in the position, you're not going to rewrite your personal statement, nor should you, because the core of it should stay the same. But you definitely want to spend time kind of talking about the specific school and the reasons why you think it would be a good fit. Because if you don't, and I see plenty of personal statements that you could tell that they kind of copied and pasted like 3 sentences about Duke at the very end. Sometimes even the font is different. That's not good. It's just not going to make much of an impression. And at best, you've kind of squandered an opportunity to impress someone and stand out And at worst, you basically convince somebody to pass on you because they don't think you're interested in their school. So make sure that you spend a little bit of time talking about the school in question, why you like it, when any kind of personal connections you have to it, or people you know who maybe went there, or role models. I'll give you another good example of that. Another personal statement that I was reading, and it was actually from a Mexican applicant, started by quoting President of Chile, who happens to be former president of Chile, happened to have gone to Duke. And they quoted them, but in context, right? And that was great because, clearly this person has done some research. And I remember this, even though I've read like 700 of those things so far, because I was really impressed. It's like, okay, it's not somebody from their country, and they've clearly, done their research on Duke. So those are the kinds of things that I recommend. Now, I'm going to turn to Maria really quickly, because I would love to hear her perspective, considering that she's gone through this process not too long ago. So maybe, Maria, you can share with us sort of if you have any tips or thoughts on, or how you went about crafting your own personal statement.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would really stress is timing. I think that we think it's really easy to just like write it down in a couple of weeks. I would say don't stress about the time, do it in advance. So that way you do a better story and you can like write it down, let it sit for a while, and then think like while you're showering or doing anything, oh, I should also do this, I can connect that. So I definitely think that's really important. And having a story where you connect why you're interested in Duke, why like Duke also should be interested in you, because we don't only need to see Duke as an asset for ourselves, but also how we are an asset for Duke. Show your abilities, why you're different, and that way you can also stand out. And another thing that I did in my personal statements was mentioning professors. Professors, I was really interested in taking classes with them. And that way you also show that you did some research.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And mentioning professors and classes is a great way, because especially if you're not sure what to say about a particular university, this is something that you can always do. And every law school that you go to, on their website, you can find, there's the curriculum. So you can find their faculty. That's a great way to show interest. So thank you, Marie. Okay, so the next piece of your application is your CV, or again, we call it resume. This should not be too difficult for most of you. I must admit, I don't know if in Mexico it's common to have kind of like the longer style CV or a shorter style resume. Whatever it is, my best piece of advice to you is that you spend a little bit of time using specific examples when you're talking about your work-related experience or your academic experience or your internships, rather than using sort of very vague terms. For example, I read so many CVs that, maybe there's an internship or a firm that a person is working at, and the description would say, conducted legal research, drafted legal memoranda. Well, I should hope that you conducted legal research if you worked at a law firm. It tells me nothing, right? Like it is basically literally just filling pages with words that don't mean anything. So, try to step back and give some examples of the work that you did. It's kind of especially paint a story. And here is another tip. Depending on when in your professional career you're planning to apply for the LLM, it is possible that your previous work or your previous courses are not what you're trying to do in the LLM, that you're trying to pivot. Maybe you were a corporate associate at a big law firm in Mexico City, and now you want to do human rights. Or maybe you were interested in litigation, but now you want to do environmental law. There's nothing wrong with that. But if your resume and your personal statement don't tell the same story, don't ignore it, just address it. Say that, you could see from my CV, remember, they're going to probably look at your CV first. You could see from my CV that most of my experience was in this particular space. But now, the reason I want to do the LLM is because I want to pivot. I want to shift to in a different direction. Totally fine. It's only when it's unaddressed that it raises red flags, because then I'm asking myself, okay, So this person practiced corporate law for 5 years, and their entire personal statement is about human rights. Like something doesn't connect here. Why, right? You always want to answer that question. Like if it's a, you don't want the admissions officer asking one. All right. So the next piece of your application is often the one that I get the most questions about. And those are letters of recommendation. And I will share some advice, and then I'll turn to Maria to see if she has other thoughts. But basically, in general, most top tier LLM programs will require you to submit 2 or 3 letters. There are a handful of programs that will require that at least one of those letters be from a professor, from an academic. Other schools, and this includes Duke, kind of treat it more contextually, because if you, for example, had worked for 5 years, you may not remember, or you may not have a strong connection with your university at this point. So a letter from somebody who barely remembers you may not be particularly useful. But make sure that you understand first what school is asking. Second, you have to ask yourself who should be writing that letter. And that is where I think it's very important for you to ask yourself a couple of questions. First of all, you want to find out, you want to make sure that you're asking someone who has extensive experience and knowledge. Somebody that you've either worked with, or maybe who knows you well, who knows your work, who can say something beyond a particular grade that you received in the class. So often a supervisor could be very helpful, like if you worked for somebody, or if it's a professor, maybe a professor in a smaller class, or a professor that you had a lot of interactions with, maybe taking multiple classes with, would be better. Second, you really want to make sure that that professor or that recommender knows what you're trying to to sell, essentially, to the university. How are you positioning yourself? So if you can, give them a draft of your personal statement. Maybe just sit down and talk to them about it, so that they can kind of reflect what you are trying to tell the university through your own materials. Because that's another inconsistency that I sometimes see. I will get letters of recommendation, and the professor is talking about one thing, and then the personal statement is just totally has something completely different. And then I'm just trying to ask myself, why is this person recommending this applicant? And should I really be thinking about how should I weigh that recommendation? The last thing I'll say is that status does not matter. Sometimes I get a letter of recommendation from like the president of a particular country, or a foreign minister, or the ambassador. And it sounds really great and impressive, but then most of the time that letter contains no substance at all. And it's very obvious to me that this person has barely a passing knowledge of this applicant, and that they're just trying to impress me. But I'm not looking for the most impressive recommender. I'm not admitting the recommender. I'm not admitting the president or the ambassador. I'm admitting you, the applicant. So what I really want is the substance, not the title on the piece of paper. So Maria, I'll turn to you now to see if you have any additional thoughts on kind of the recommendation process.
Something else that I try to find when I was looking for my recommenders is professors that had done an LLM program or a doctoral study somewhere, especially in the US. And that way they can say, based on their performance at school, or even, I don't know, partners or associates in your law firm that have done an LLM, which probably like most of them have, they can compare, like, due to her performance, I see that she can be successful at X law school. So I think that's really useful and very convincing too.
That's really good. That's excellent piece of advice. Absolutely. And the other thing I would add is that the professor can put it in perspective. So like, for example, you get letters that say, I've taught law school for 20 years, and out of, 1,000 students that I've taught, this person is in the top 10% or top 15%. Very, very helpful framing. Same with a partner at a law firm. I've supervised many associates, and this person is in the, top tier of performers, right? Those are very, very helpful ways to crystallize kind of your merit and how outstanding you are in the mind of the reader, of the admissions officer. So excellent point. And again, this requires you to try to really kind of coach, especially if they haven't written those letters before, coach them to kind of get those things out. I'll add one other thing that just occurred to me. Don't write those letters for them. If you have to do it, because sometimes I know people will say, well, if you write it, I'll sign it. Please think about what they're saying, because I sometimes can tell, if you're basically two recommenders are saying exactly the same thing, almost using the exact same words, that's a problem. I will typically not hold it against the applicant, because I feel like if the recommender cannot be bothered to write a letter, that's kind of unfortunate for the applicant. But I would have, if you can help it, try to avoid it. Try to get them to write it in their own voice. Maybe give them an outline of the letter, but just try to induce them to actually use their own language rather than just drafting it for them, because I think it really detracts from the effectiveness of it. Okay. So this is my favorite topic, isn't it everyone's? Requesting scholarship. I mean, this is why we're here. You're very lucky, those of you who apply through FUNED, you receive some additional funding. But the truth is, legal education in the United States is extraordinarily expensive. It is very expensive for Americans. It's very expensive for everyone. And the other truth is that most students, unless they're very, very fortunate and come from very wealthy families, will take out loans to finance at least part of their education. And so why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I think everyone should request scholarships. It does not hurt your application. And what I sometimes see are students who do not submit a scholarship request because out of sort of misplaced fear that it will somehow hurt them in the admission process. And you should know that all top schools will separate, they bifurcate admissions and finances. So, the fact that you're not rich will not hurt you in any way when it comes to admissions, right? And in fact, most folks will not even look at scholarships and make those decisions until after folks have been, they've been admitted. So, it doesn't hurt you to ask for scholarships. You should do it, but you also should think about what exactly are you asking and how. And because there's so many scholarship requests that I read that are completely unhelpful to me, because again, they're mostly just recitation of your merits. Now, remember what I just said. If I'm reading your scholarship request, most likely I've already admitted you. So you do not need to convince me that you're a fantastic applicant. I already know this, right? I've admitted you. What I am trying to figure out is how can I help you make this education possible? And for that, I need something from you. And what I need from you is to show me that you have a plan, that you've thought about this and you're very pragmatic and practical, right? Some schools, in fact, I believe, will literally tell you, tell me how much money you have, tell me how much money you're asking for, like give me a number. Duke is not that. I think that's a little bit, that's a little too much in my view. But I think what you could do is be kind of clear about the funds that, or at least if not the monetary amount, but show us that you have thought about financing this degree and that you have taken affirmative steps to do it. So how does that, so a good scholarship request letter will basically say, look, I've been saving for this education for years. I have applied to these scholarships. I'm fortunate to count on some support from my family or friends or whatever, but there is still a gap, and I need help to fill that gap. And if you can kind of give a sense of what that gap is, that will actually help you, because otherwise the scholarship committees will often decide that you need 100% tuition, which is very, very difficult to get, and most schools don't offer, or maybe offer 1 or 2 out of 100 people they admit, or 200 people they admit. And so you're actually hurting your own chance, in other words. So you need to think about what realistically you need to make this education happen, and then put that on the page. because I think you're much more likely to get what you need out. And again, showing that you've kind of taken steps to finance this will be very, very helpful. Maria, do you have any thoughts on this beyond what I've already said?
I would say mainly looking that you're proactive, that you're trying to do this, that, I don't know, like I asked this other, your school, your job, other scholarships. I see that you say in the presentation Fulbright. I think that's also a good option. Like showing that you're really interested in going to that program, but what you need is like the money, and probably they will help you get that if you show you are like doing the steps and you're also a good candidate.
Yeah, exactly. So that's very helpful. You know, somebody, this is too much, don't do that. Somebody attached their tax return one time. And I was like, I don't want to read this. First of all, there's like a lot of personal information here that I shouldn't be looking at. So don't do that, please. Don't send me your tax return. Okay. So this is kind of a broader point, but very important. And I will tell you why in just a minute, because this is just happened. But remember that when you are applying to law school, to the LLM program in the US, you're evaluated not just on the 4 corners of the documents you submit, but on the entirety of you as a candidate, which means that everything you do vis-a-vis that school will be logged and evaluated. So if you're calling the school and asking lots of very uninformed questions that clearly show that you haven't bothered to spend 5 minutes looking at their website, that is going to get to the admissions committee. That is not going to be lost on the school, and that will hurt your admission chances. If you are making assumptions based on what your friend's cousin's sister said, rather than looking at the website or relying on some sort of source, authoritative source, that is going to hurt you, because again, it shows that you're not serious, you're not detail oriented. Nobody wants those kinds of folks in their programs, especially top tier law schools. Think about your social media presence. I think having a LinkedIn profile is very, very important. I don't think it's going to hurt you if you don't have one, but if you have one, it will help you. And you better be sure, you should know that almost every school will look at your social media presence. So, if you have some compromising things out there, you may want to, adjust your privacy settings as soon as possible, because this will hurt you. I will tell you a real world example that just happened this year, where we received a note from one of our alumni that somebody that they knew who was applying to our program was being very inappropriate on social media. Okay. And guess what? That person is not getting admitted to the program. Your entire candidacy has been evaluated, not just the 4 documents or 5 documents you've submitted. The last thing I'll say is that there, a number of schools, Duke included, does interviews. We do Zoom interviews with finalists. I think Maria and I did an interview. She probably remembers it.
Yes.
All I remember is that she did a great job. She probably remembers more than that. But it's, if you are doing an interview, don't worry about it. It's an opportunity for you to not just make a good impression, but also to ask lots of questions. So my one recommendation I'd give you is that if you have an interview scheduled with a school, make sure that you're prepared with some questions. And then visiting law schools. So in many ways, folks in Mexico are in a fortunate position relative to folks in, I don't know, Nepal or South Korea, in that, if you have the means, you can actually visit the school, experience it. And if you could do that, that would be very, very helpful. Maybe go to a couple of your top schools. You can do it after you're admitted or before. But try to do it if you can. I think it will give you a much better sense of sort of what this environment looks like. And we'll talk in a minute about how that could help you actually decide where to go. But it'll also make a very good impression on the school, because it really shows that you're serious. But again, it's not going to hurt you not to visit. I would say out of our students, maybe less than 10% have actually visited the school before they enrolled. We understand that it's a big ask. But again, some of you, if you're thinking, especially a couple of years down the line, maybe you're going on vacation in the US, maybe you're in Florida or something, or in Texas. Go to some of the schools, and don't just kind of walk around the campus and go to a gift shop to buy a T-shirt. Actually email the admissions officer and say, I'm thinking about applying to the LM program. I would love to visit to speak with someone. Maybe I can sit on a class. Maybe I can speak with a current student and see what they say. And that could actually be helpful to you as you decide later on between the programs, because some schools, and I count Duke among them, love when you do that. We love when people visit. And others don't. Others should just blow you off because they're like, well, you're not, planning, you're not in our pool right now, so I don't care. I feel like that's short-sighted, and it also gives you a little bit maybe insight into the culture of the place. So something for you to think of. Okay, so I'm now going to turn to the second part of the program, which is how to pick. Let's assume that you followed some of the advice that I've just shared, that you're excellent candidates with great grades, impressive background and experience, and you got into, say, 3, 4, 5 law schools. It's not unusual, and now you have to decide where to go. And so my suggestion to you is that you really think systematically about this, not just kind of haphazardly. And the factors that you see on the screen, in my view, are the primary factors that you should consider when deciding between the program. This is a big investment of time and money. It's often a life-changing experience. So you really should take it very, very seriously. I will talk about sort of some of these factors in detail in just a minute. But the one that I'm going to start with, and the one that's one of the more important ones, is reputation, right? Everybody wants to go to a very good school, and that's obvious, and that you should do that. But what I think sometimes happens, especially with folks in the LM programs, is that they confuse reputation with ranking. And those two things are not the same thing. Ranking gives you kind of a general sense, perhaps, of the reputation. But keep in mind that in the US, first of all, there are multiple different rankings, and they're all over the place. Second of all, rankings that do exist tend to rank JD programs, not LLM programs. LLM programs are not ranked. And lastly, rankings could be very deceiving. My favorite example of this is a real life example, is that, about a decade ago, Princeton Review, which is one of the rankings companies, did an experiment. They sent a survey to, I don't know, like 1,000 attorneys, American attorneys. And it basically was a very basic survey where they asked them to rank top 10 law schools in the US. That's all they asked. And so people wrote down what they thought were the top 10 law schools in the US. And number 5 law school was Princeton Law School. Now, does anybody know why that's a problem? Okay, I don't hear anybody, so I'm going to tell you. There is no Princeton Law School. Princeton doesn't have a law school. Okay, there's no law school. This should tell you something about kind of how reliable these factors are. Some of these people just make stuff up, basically. So, when you look at reputation, certainly look at rankings, but also talk to attorneys that you know, talk to people in the field, look at the programs, and I encourage you to kind of identify top tier schools, and that's not that difficult. And there's a group of probably about, I would say, 15 to 20 law schools in the US that, most people would agree constitute kind of like the elite tier of the schools. And once you've identified them, all the other factors on those screens become much more important than, the numerical ranking. I think it's a huge mistake to go to number 1 school versus number 3 school just because you saw that it's ranked #1 versus #3. It's all those other factors that matter. So we're going to turn to that. So obviously, the most important factor you should look at is academic experience. What is the experience like? And please keep in mind that LLM programs are very, very different from one another. Unlike JD programs that are tightly regulated by the American Bar Association, meaning that your fundamental experience at an American JD program at University of Ohio or University of Northern Dakota or University of Pennsylvania will more or less be the same. That is not true for LLM. So you really need to do your due diligence when you look about the academic experience. Roughly speaking, there are two kinds of LLM programs in the US when we're talking about top tier schools. There are programs that are large and tend to be in large cities. And then there are programs that are small or mid-sized that tend to be on college campus. Again, there is no right or wrong here, but you need to think about what program you are more attracted to, what program would give you a better experience. You may not know, but at least you should know that there is a big difference between those two. There's another kind of factor to consider. How integrated or not international LLM students are in the program, in the law school as a whole. Bigger schools tend to be more segregated. Smaller schools tend to be more integrated. Why it matters? Well, it matters for all kinds of reasons, but the most important one is that, how much access are you going to have to your American JD classmates, to your professors, to the classes? You need to make our classes mostly for LLMs only, or are you mixed in with JDs? There are advantages, in my view, of taking classes with American JDs. That's you're trying to get, US legal education here. So when there's a program that essentially puts you in a bubble, you want to ask yourself, is that the kind of experience you want? Or do you really want to experience what the law school is famous for? So that's one thing. The other thing that you should ask yourself is how available or not the courses are, right? So no top tier law school will guarantee you enrollment in any particular course unless it's an LLM only course. And I just talked about the disadvantages of those, and there's some. So if it's a mixed course with JDs, they can't tell you at the outset that you're going to get in or not. But what you can find out, and you should when you're deciding between programs, is how LLMs are treated relative to JDs, because that should give you some insights into the culture of the school. For example, there's some very good programs that allow JD students to register first, and then whatever spaces are left at the very end go to LLMs, which means that their choices are very limited. There are other programs that allow everybody to register kind of at the same time. They're just going to open the floodgates. And it's fair, but the problem with that is that, especially in the first semester, you don't know what you're registering for because you haven't been in the school, you haven't been through the program. And you're competing with JDs for these spots who have been in the program for a year or two. So you may pick courses that are not the right fit for you, and then you're stuck. Duke kind of takes a middle approach where we actually reserve spaces in courses for the LLMs. So we can't guarantee any individual student space in any individual course, but we can certainly guarantee that there will be spaces for LLMs in every course, and there will be LLMs in every course, unless nobody enrolls in a particular course, which is pretty rare. And so that's one thing we do. And then the second thing we do is we prioritize after the initial enrollment period. And in the second semester, we prioritize LLMs before second and first year JD students, meaning that LLMs are kind of second in priority after third year JDs who are also graduating. So again, we try to make it as fair and equitable as possible, and also to give our LLM students as much access as we can without obviously unfairly disadvantaging our other students. Look at opportunities for specialization look at opportunities for internships, externships, clinics. Basically ask yourselves, what kind of access does the law school provide to LLMs, and how does it compare with JDs? And if you see that there is really a wall of separation, that should give you pause. Also, if it's important to you, ask if you can take classes outside the school, the law school itself. Most top-tier law schools are part of, world-class university. And so maybe you want to take a course at a business school or at an economics department or something completely unrelated. We had somebody taking Italian last semester because they just really wanted to learn Italian. And if that matters to you, you want to find out if you can do it or not. For some people, this may be your last chance of being at a university. So take advantage of it. Do something that is maybe outside like a very narrow purview of your particular specialty. So think about that. Think about access to pro bono organizations, student organizations, other extracurriculars. If it's not clear, ask, because I think it's important for your academic experience in the program. And it's not always going to be clear when you're looking at the program how much access you get. So you have to. Maria, do you have anything to add on this? Anything I missed?
Yeah, and a factor I really considered was class size. When I saw that Duke was a really small class size compared to others, were almost twice, I thought, and I actually felt it, the international team really helps you a lot. And also the Career Center helps you a lot, which I probably think that in other schools where the LLM program is really big, they don't have the time for you. For example, last week I emailed Oleg's secretary, and what was it, in 2 days, I could have a talk with him. And I'm sure that if I talk to someone in a case where it's a university with a huge class of LLM, that would not be possible. Here, if you reach out, you can get help, you can chat with your professors, and you get like a lot of assistance. So for me, that was a game changer.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, and I think you're absolutely right. That is often a function of size. I will add one other thing. So there are a couple of schools that have very small LLM programs. We're talking 15, 20, 30 students. And it may look like that's appealing because, but I personally think that's maybe too small, because if you're in that small of a group, there is not a lot of institutional support. If there's 1,000 JDs and 30 LLM students, how much attention is the institution going to pay to that group? So you really want to go for balance. It's kind of like that fairy tale about the three bears, the Goldilocks, right? Like it's not too big, not too small. That's my personal view of where you want to go. But I think that's a really good point that Maria is making. So the academic piece is not the only piece. You will spend more time outside your classroom than inside. And so you definitely want to think about the location of the program very carefully. And like I said before, you kind of compare a big city to a college town. You want to look at the size of the class, like Maria said, but also diversity of the class. How many countries are represented? Is there a group that just kind of dominates the class? Because that could change the dynamics. Or are there a lot of countries, a lot of nationalities? You want to look at kind of the school spirit. Is there a lot that you can do, or do people just kind of come to the school, do their work, leave, and go live their own life? Now, for some people, that's an attraction. Like some people don't want to really feel like part of a law school community. They want to treat it kind of like as a job. And that's fine, but just keep in mind that at a place like Duke, that you're not going to be very happy, because this is really an all-encompassing immersive experience. But if it matters to you, if you want that, you want to make sure that you're getting it. And also, you want to check how strong the alumni community is. Do the alumni, does the school know their alumni? Are they in touch? Are they helpful? All of those are important questions. Some of them you can ask the school itself. Some of them, if the school doesn't do it proactively, ask to talk to a current student. Ask to talk to an alum. Be proactive. I know at Duke, we do that by default. We do it because we want you to get this information. Not every school does it. Doesn't mean you can't ask, and if you ask, they might do it. Maria, I'd love for you to touch on that a little bit more as well. you know, what are your thoughts on kind of the social component of the LLM?
I would say that the LLM, it becomes like your family. We're really, really close. It's a really close community. And in comparison with other schools, I have some other friends who went to bigger cities. They like everyone goes do their thing. I mean, they finish classes and they go like they have some other friends or they just go visit museums or whatever. Here you're kind of like stuck in nature in school. So like you have to be with your friends and that's like the main attraction. There's a couple of things that you can do, of course, but like the main attraction here is like your friends from the LLM and also some JD friends that you do.
Yeah.
And I would say that definitely that like tags along with Duke alumni. I've seen that when you reach out to Duke alumni, they're like really, really nice with you. And I feel that's the sense of community that Duke has.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And I think that's very true. Our alumni are kind of known for the fact that they really want to help our students. And I think, again, it goes back to the culture. Kind of the bigger question is, what is the culture of a particular law school? And that's a difficult thing to figure out, right? Because you can't go on the website and say, what is the culture? Like it's something that you have to kind of piece together by looking at all these different factors. And I really encourage you all to think about it because it's such an important component of your day-to-day life and your professional success later on. And I do think that one of the reasons people choose Duke over maybe some of the other peer schools is because of our culture. I think that's true for our JDs and for our LLMs. So if this is important to you, you should weigh it heavily. If it's not important to you, fine, but at least you're making an intentional, rational decision rather than just kind of being led by marketing. So I think that's an important piece of it. Maria alluded to this a little bit, but I think the career center role is also an important one. And so you should be kind of thinking about that as you're evaluating different schools. Different schools approach LLM career counseling differently. My suggestion and my perspective is that a good career center will do all the things that you see on the screen. They will go well beyond just kind of helping you prepare a cover letter or helping you revise your CV to look more like an American resident. All the good schools will do that. Like you don't have to worry about it. But what you really want is that one-on-one coaching and counseling. And folks, if it matters to you, again, not for everybody, but if it matters to you, you really want to make sure that there are resources out there to help you make the best out of your degree after you graduate. Because it's such an important asset, but you need to be able to talk about it, you need to be able to leverage it, and you need to be able to create a narrative, a story that makes sense to a potential employer, whether that's in the United States, in Mexico, in London, who cares, wherever it is, the employer wants to know why you did what you did and how that's going to make their life better. Ultimately, they're hiring you to help them do whatever it is that they're doing. And it's actually not as easy as it may seem to be able to sit down and really think about how your steps in on your career ladder led you to be a great fit for a particular employer. We at Duke, we do a lot of coaching and a lot of kind of one-on-one work. My colleague Jabrina, who Maria and Leslie know very well, she works one-on-one with students. She also does workshops. She brings a lot of alumni here so that the students have the opportunity to really build that narrative and leverage their background and their experience and their education to get the best possible opportunity. One thing I have to go out and say is we do not have any jobs. Like sometimes people think that like I can just open my drawer and like hand somebody a job, right? Like I wish I could do that. I wish I had a secret drawer full of jobs. But what we do here and what most law schools will do is they will give you the tools to get the job that you want. The question for you is, what are the tools? How open they are with giving you those tools, and how much help you want and you need. And that's a question you should ask yourselves and the school. The bar exam. So that's another important point. Some people really feel that they don't need to take a US bar. They're just here because they want to get the education. Others feel like the bar exam is really an important component of their professional success, and that's one of the key reasons they're doing the LLM. So if you're in that category, just make sure that your school really understands how to help you, and that it has a curriculum that allows you to pass that particular bar exam. For us, most of our students take the New York bar and pass the New York bar. And obviously, our curriculum is designed to help you do that. We're very familiar with the process. We're sort of very well equipped, I think, to advise students on that. You receive a lot of guidance. I would say that most schools are familiar with the New York bar, but some schools may be less familiar with some of the other bars, like the Texas bar or the California bar, Illinois, Washington, D.C. So if there's a particular bar that you care about, just be sure to ask and make sure that the school is prepared to help you there. The other important aspect of this is that if your education is a little bit unorthodox, you might, especially with the New York bar, you might run into problems with kind of establishing eligibility. New York bar is famously very finicky when it comes to that kind of stuff. And if you're worried about it, if you think, maybe I studied at one school and then COVID happened and it was online and then something else happened, and I'm just worried that the bar is going to say, well, what you did back home just does not work for us. If you're worried about this, make sure that the school that you're going to is prepared to help you advocate on your behalf before the Board of Law exam. I'll give you an example that happened last year. Our class speaker was, his education was very, very good, but it was somewhat unorthodox. And so the New York Board of Law Examiners was very antagonistic toward him, and basically kept saying that this didn't make sense or that didn't make sense. And so we actually, he, with our help, filed an appeal to the Court of Appeals, which is the Supreme Court in New York. And we worked with him to overturn that decision. We basically, the school worked with him to convince the court that in fact he was eligible, and he was, and he took the bar and he passed, and everything is great. But it took a lot of institutional support. So make sure that you get that, rather than just be kind of handed a brochure and said, okay, well, good luck to you. Here's the website. Kind of go do your thing. All right, I promise I'm almost done. So there's a long-term impact of the degree that I always want to point out to, because I think this is one thing that folks sometimes forget. And again, I'm not talking about Duke specific. Duke is certainly one of the schools that I can talk about, but really any LLM degree, you always want to think about the long-term impact. The saying we have here at the program is that you don't graduate from Duke, you graduate into Duke. It's a lifelong relationship you have with the school. And it's true. This is not just a marketing slogan. And if you think about it that way, you should be asking yourselves, what can I do in the course of the LLM that will really create a long-term positive impact in your career? Because the truth is, 20 years from now, you're not going to remember what you studied in every particular class. That's not going to matter. But the relationships you build will matter a lot. The multi-jurisdictional exposure and knowledge, the friends you have all over the world, that will matter a lot. The fact that you understand what different cultures, how people communicate, what is said and what is unsaid, that is going to matter to you for the rest of your life. So I encourage you to have that intentionality when you approach your LLM degree, because it's not in every school that you can get this just by default. You have to kind of seek those things out, and you may want to ask folks in the school how you can do that. What are your opportunities to build leadership skills? Can you participate in student organizations, for example? Can you build interdisciplinary knowledge by taking courses at other schools? Do you have the opportunity to build cross-cultural competency by interacting with Americans and having people from 40 countries who are your friends. Those are the kinds of things that I think you really should be thinking about as you evaluate programs. And as you, whichever program you go to, make sure that this is an important component of what you want to do in the program, because it doesn't just happen automatically. Okay, that was my last slide. Two more things to say. So first of all, Maria has graciously offered to stick around after the Q&A and after I drop off the line, because I recognize that sometimes it's easier to ask questions you really want to ask when I'm not here, and that's okay. And maybe you want to ask them in Spanish, and that's fine too, obviously. And sadly, Spanish is not one of the languages I speak. Second, social media is a great way to kind of learn about the culture of the place. So you see here our social media channels. As you're looking at different schools, follow their social media channels. First of all, it will give you a better insight into what's going on at the school and might help you write a better personal statement. But second, see how much or how little they're highlighting their international program. Because again, that gives you like a little bit of an insight into how important or not the international students and the international programs are to those schools. So I wouldn't base your decisions on whether your favorite school is on Twitter or not, obviously, but you certainly don't want to overlook that entirely, because you will, I think, glean some good insight. All right, I'm sorry I talked so much. Maria, do you have any other thoughts? Maybe I'd love for you to maybe just say like 2 words about what led you to pick Duke, given what we've all talked about. Why did you decide to come here versus the 5 other schools that I'm sure you've gotten admitted into?
Yeah, well, for me, it was actually the community. Knowing that for me, it was the first time I lived far away from home, first time away from my parents, friends, family, everything. So being in a place where I felt I was a part of was vital. And Duke was definitely a place that I got the vibe where I would be like that. I actually visited the school. I talked to Oleg, I remember. And I felt that I would be welcomed in this place. In other schools, I didn't feel that. I felt that I was just another student, another number. And here you don't feel that. You feel you're another very important member of the community.
Oh, thank you. You are a very important member of our community, Maria, and I definitely appreciate you saying that. I think that is what makes my job, and I think Leslie's job, as enjoyable as it is to building relationships with you all and seeing all the amazing things that you do as students and then later as alumni. What questions do you all have for us? I'll stick around for a few minutes if you have questions for me. You can raise your hand. You can put your question in the chat. You can just unmute yourself, but feel free to kind of chime in and let us know what you're thinking.
Preguntas,
Maybe
any
we answered all
questions,
the questions.
anyone? Yeah. This is a good opportunity to ask away.
So if you don't have questions, which is totally fine, I know how it is. I want to say thank you, first of all, for those who stuck around to, hopefully this was useful. And second, again, Maria has graciously offered to stay after I hop off, so you can ask her all the questions that you want to know. Pablo, yeah, I saw you raised your hand.
Yeah, hi, how are you? I had just one question related to the difference between, as an international student, pursuing an LLM or a JD. Is there any, apart from the 3 years that a JD takes, is there any fundamental difference, any disadvantages you might have as an international student, or maybe some advantages, maybe related to passing the bar or something like that?
I wouldn't say that there are disadvantages to passing the bar. I mean, one thing I will say is that from the finding a position in the United States, depending on your background, it will be more challenging with an LLM versus a JD, right? Because an LLM is only 1 year, JD is 3 years. And I would say that the majority of American law firms tend to hire JD students. Now, that doesn't mean that LLM students are not hired, they are, but it is a little bit more of a challenge in the US legal market, unless you already have, 5+ years of top-notch corporate legal experience at, Galizia or White and Case or another top firm in Rich, Mueller or some other firm in Mexico that, is very much comparable to like a top-tier firm in the US. In terms of the bar exam, I think so much depends on the student. I would say that by and large, our students from Mexico pass the bar at numbers comparable to that of JD's. I think it's much more about, how much preparation and time you put in. But certainly from the academic perspective, in terms of classes, you can take all the same classes as our JD student.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that answered my question completely.
Good question. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. It was great to be here with you. Thank you, FUNED, for organizing. We are always appreciative of your partnership. And hopefully, if you have any other questions, you can just reach out to me directly. I'm pretty easy to find. And I'm sure Sophia can share my contact information. If you can't find me for some reason, I think I'm the only Oleg at the law school. It's not a very common name. So it should be pretty easy. And again, thanks, Maria, for sticking around. I know she'll, she's such a fantastic ambassador of Duke. I'm sure she'll tell you all you need to know. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for your time, Oleg.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.